Bonjour, bienvenue. Bonjour.
Bonjour à tous.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Soyez les bienvenus à cet événement de présentation du bilan mondial.
So please, good afternoon and welcome to everyone who has come to this afternoon session. I see that you're quite a few. We're going to wait for everyone to come into the virtual meeting room. So please pay attention to your microphones. Don't leave them on during the other presenters' presentation. And also, we also have a simultaneous interpretation. So if you need to follow this session in English or in French, you just have to click on the icon on the bottom.
It's all available. You just have to click on the button at the bottom of the screen. Welcome, everyone. Et on peut tout de suite commencer par donner la parole à Ronan Dantec, président de l'association.
So let's give the floor to Mr. Dantec, President of Climate Change. Thank you to everyone. Thank you for organizing this meeting. We wanted to do this in person, but as you know, the case numbers are going up. Therefore, as a precaution, we're doing it virtually. Even if I think that everyone wishes to do such meetings face to face. And there will be a virtual reception at the end of this week sessions. So for those who don't know us, Climate Change is an association which is a few years old. We were put together following 2021, or looking forward to 2021. And then we've been to various African summits. So our goal was to be a network for the non-state actors to create dynamic and to really foster our action, put together suggestions. So we've been doing this over the past 5 years, and within that we have this observatory of that we have spoken about previously. It's an observatory that is not taking things on their face value. So every year we publish some reports following the COPE conference in Glasgow, for example, but sometimes at these meetings, they have a lot of pledges, and we wanted to see if it was possible, especially in Glasgow, to see if we could stabilize the climate change. So what we're looking at here is actually what's being done. So we look at the metrics. It's a meta approach. So we look at all of the existing reports, and then we summarize them, and then we follow what can be taken from them. And we'll present this today. So this summary for decision makers was presented in Glasgow already, but it's only from today on that we are putting the entirety of the 214 pages of the report, the sector-based report. So not only do we look at all of the big trends, but we go into the crux of the matter to see what each and other parties are doing. So the report for decision makers was presented in Glasgow. I think it's important to rebound from what we said in Glasgow, especially when we look at what was done in Glasgow, especially during the last minutes of the Glasgow meeting. And the ambassador for France, who is with us here today, was a witness of what happened. So what happened at the end was in unison with what we said at the very beginning, what Antoine and Samuel said. So the rebound of CO2 emissions in 2021 after the decrease in 2021 caused by COVID, shows us that we're not living in a uniform world with various countries previously called industrialized countries who are going through emission decreases, especially in Europe. United States may be a different question, but then in the emerging market countries, for example, China, India, we see that there is a constant increase in emissions. And especially when we look at India and their intervention at the end of COP, that they wanted to change the text, that it was not possible to put that carbon generated energy would be eradicated. They just said it should be weaned off. It shows the geopolitical strategies and paradigm that is in place today. So after our disappointment in COPE, we had the feeling that we didn't have the choice to do anything else than really demonstrate on the ground what's happening on the ground. And that as Europe goes forward quicker with reducing its emissions, quicker the EU will be more and more able to bring people with them and to really help other large emitting countries to really reduce their emissions. So to do so, we had to analyze, illustrate, and show this in the report. So as a conclusion, 2 examples in the report. Firstly, very interesting results of the regional authorities in the Covenant of Mayors from 2003 to 2018. This covenant represents about 16% of the European population. They were able to reduce their emissions by more than 20%. So it's much more than they actually represent from a population point of view. So they have a quantitative impact on the results nowadays, following the pledge of minus about 50% up until over the next 10 years. This we'll find also. So we also see that all of the stakeholders, including companies, multinationals, are really being involved, and that they are the ones who are really also being involved in moving towards a low carbon economy, and that they are helping to transition from a fossil fuel economy to a renewable energy economy. So I think I've said what I had to say, and I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Antoine, coordinator of the Observatory of Climate Change, and Mr. Samuel Laval, who is the deputy of research for the Observatory. So not only do they put together all of the reports, but this report was done together in an extremely efficient manner, especially considering our human resources. So Mr. Antoine will look at the transversal takeaways of the GRS 2021, knowing that the sector by sector trends will also be found on the website in French and in English, such as the case every year. Thank you for this presentation. We're so happy to be here with all of you. So to start up, I'd like to look at what is this publication actually is, the report. So what is the Global Synthesis Report, sector by sector? It's the 4th time it's been published. It's very unique, especially in the intellectual publications that are in this domain. It's not only summarized, but also we have a lot of data. So we look at what's actually being done, and we don't really concentrate too much on the actual pledges. So this gives us our storytelling, our narrative, so that we can see what is actually being undertaken by civil society, companies, and also non-state actors in 6 key sectors: energy, transport, building, industry, waste, and land use. So that's the actual report, what it is holistically. So this report can be looked at online. So let's look at what's new in this report. It's something that has really changed since its beginning. We've changed the form of the report. And Samuel Laval will be able to tell us about some of the changes and the new things in this report. So this report was organized in various segments, and I'd like to go through these segments. So we looked at indicators, the indicators for each sector. You can see the various indicators here, which will allow us to see under actions, emissions, 2020, 2021, pursuant to each sector concerning energy. And then we go into the crux of the matter, looking at the various trends, about 2.5 per sector, which allows us to look at the key trends concerning climate action and the evolution of each of the emissions in the subsector. So we drew them from about 1,000 sources, 13 of which were written by the Observatory. And there were also contributions from third-party experts, which we asked to collaborate with us for this question. So they're put into two substructures. Firstly, a data overview, which gives us a holistic view of the various subsectors, and then the observatory's lens, which allows us really to concentrate on the various actions and trends, which allow us to explain the emissions. So we look at the regions, the trends, and the various actors. So here you can see the trend concerning road transportation with a focus on EV markets in Europe. Finally, then we have the various signals. So we look at what's been said in the media, which allows us to identify the various events, initiatives, transformations, which cannot be qualified as trends, but will be tomorrow's trends, if you like. And we then flag them as things to watch. And then each sector has then a case study, which allows us to focus on an initiative that's been undertaken by one private or public actor or many actors. And we use various examples from various continents, 16 countries in total, which allows us to understand the success of climate action holistically. So I'd like to give the floor now to Mr. Antoine. So it's a very dense report, but which has been somewhat changed in its form and to allow you to understand things quicker. It's very interactive. And I hope the report will allow you to find the information that you're looking for on the relevant topics. So what we presented in the COP was 10 key takeaways, which are summarized here, allowing us to understand what are the transversal trends undertaken by the various actors to give us an idea of what's being done and how climate action has evolved from 2020 to 2021. So firstly, we're not going to go into it in great detail. So following the COVID crisis and the decrease of emissions, 2021 has seen that the emissions are going up again and that there is a gap between various regions. In Europe, America, and other industrialized countries, there is a slow structural decline. And this has been going on for the past couple of years. So we see that the rebound of emissions is slower than in the other countries. And then there are other pickup countries, which are high emitting countries, Russia, Turkey, and Australia, who had a smaller impact of the pandemic on their emissions. And in China's case, for example, the COVID did not have a negative impact. And then they came back to surpass pre-pandemic levels. And then there are rampant emission growth in Africa and the Middle East, which were hit quite hard by the pandemic in 2020. because fossil fuel was highly impacted by the COVID pandemic, but they've come back in quite an exponential way, and because of not only economic but also demographic growth. So within these countries, we have the main thing that you have to look at is carbon or coal. So China is one of the leaders in renewable energies, but it's also responsible of 80% of new coal-fired electricity production plants in 2021. So its dependence upon coal and fossil fuels is really the thing that divides or shows this gap between developing countries and what's called industrialized country. So we see an acceleration rather than a transition. So you see that the numbers are going up, as you can see on this graph, which are somehow dampened punctually from time to time because of transitions both regionally and sectorially. We can see that there is a boom in EVs in Europe, also of solar energy in Vietnam, and then a very positive foreboding sign is the market change. And we see that there is an increase in investment in renewables. But despite this, there are some contradictions. So despite the fact that the EV market is going up, 1 car out of 10 sold in Europe is an EV. But however, 2/3 of them are either SUVs or station wagons, whose weight is much more than the average car in France or in the United States, 1.2 tons or 1.8 tons respectively. So we see that there's a type of desynchronization between electrification of the users and the decarbonization of the energy mix. So in some sectors, there is a transmission which will allow them to increase their efficiency, energy efficiency. We see that electrification of the energy mix is not able to compensate the increase in use. So renewable is moving forward constantly, meaning that there is a decrease upon the dependence of fossil fuel, but consumption is going up. And all of the climate factors of this will depend upon the efficiency of the transition. You can see that the European car market has been very positive for EV sales, also in land real estate. However, we still see that fossil fuels are the main factor in this mix. So this desynchronization can also be seen in case studies. And you can see this in the case study of undertakings of done by various decision makers. There are the examples such as Herlen in the Netherlands, which uses city heating, which is very technologically advanced, and we try to explain this in the various sectors. And this
quite often, the characteristic of 2020 and 2021, we've noticed that there is an increase of requirement, and which goes beyond the capacity of adaptation at a world scale. The globalized economy has difficulties to actually meet these new needs. We've seen it with the inflations like nickel, cobalt, and also copper or aluminum. We've seen also conditions like the lack of organizations of many ships, which are still struggling to pick up the supplies in the harbors. We've also noticed many delays in delivery because of these issues, but because also of the concentration of supply chains through a few actors like Shimano, which is a key supplier for bicycles, which has had a great success following. Shimano is a global leader, is generating 400 days of delay for delivery, which is a logistic issue at an international scale due to the regional transition and sectoral transition that we have observed. A barometer of commitments for the last 2 years, carbon neutrality is now part of large companies' recovery and growth strategies following the pandemic as well for the future strategies. And in this report, we are focusing on the fossil energy and also the main mine stakeholders on emerging sectors for gaining investment, gaining market shares, and becoming dominant stakeholders of markets, which in the past were more like niche markets. In this perspective, for carbon neutrality, the CORSIA scheme is meeting some difficulties due to the pandemic. This is to be followed. This disruption of supply and the commitments to carbon neutrality have led companies to double actions. I was talking earlier on about oil companies, mine companies. The main vehicle for investment today are the acquisitions. For example, Total Energy has acquired Saft, batteries manufacturers, and is investing in long-term projects, power purchase agreements for renewable energies or CO2 capture or hydrogen, and also getting closer to other actors. The power chase agreements are also another example of tools for a concentration of actors with a concentration in the long term between the GAFA, big cities and big businesses. This is quite considerable in order to favor a concentration of market. The over results is a getting closer of some of these actors with shorter value chains in order to relocalize their supply chains by developing new capacities which they did not have, especially for recycling and manufacturing. Our seventh key takeaway, Samuel, I give you the floor now for presenting our seventh takeaway. Yes, thank you. What we've seen already that state actors have really gotten hold of this strategy and are implementing strategies. Antoine mentioned the importance of merging and acquisition. Another important dimension of this action plan is what we call the breaking strategies. We've talked about that for carbon capture, and we focused on these two topics, and we've noticed a trend which helps us see a state of play at a key time. As you can see in 2020-2021, whether it be the hydrogen or the other technologies, we'll have to see whether these trends will give way to massive deployments or whether they will only be mainly announcements. We will be talking about this on Thursday morning during our roundtable. We will discuss this with professionals involved in this project. Hydrogen went from an unknown state. The investments have increased by 12% in 2020. $20 billion have been promised since the beginning of pandemic to deploy decarbonated hydrogen, and several states have committed to H2 strategies, including Japan and we will have a case study about that. This strategy is based on a production model, which is the production from renewable energy, which is about 1% of the production at the moment. We have more than 800 megatons of CO2. It's still a minority in industries. Today, hydrogen is mainly used for refining hydrocarbons, which is why we are talking about new technologies for decarbonating. Now, regarding the other technologies, this is still confidential. Only 26 operational projects at the moment for CCUS installations. Regarding the new announcement, these technologies are promised to a great future, 12 billion of investment in 2020 and 2021 in CCUS projects. We will have to monitor the effects, and we will talk about this on Thursday morning. The oil and gas sector is also very active in this, and more than half of the CCUS projects are financed by oil and gas companies. We also have a case studies on a project which is a collaboration between Norway and other actors. Just for like H2, we also have questions regarding the exploitation of oil fields. Now, moving on, we can see here that the various steps play a great role in all of these low carbon technologies. They play a key role. We also wanted to include in our report these recovery plans, which are granting a lot of funding to emitting sectors and low carbon sectors. We will have to monitor these plans in the coming years. Money, in order to save money, will not have the same effect when it comes to emitting sectors or low carbon sectors. Of course, we will be talking about the various local governments and their role in order to adapt the tempo of these new transitions. Here, we will focus and we will have a roundtable on Thursday on this topic. So you can register for this on our website. As Ronan was saying in the introduction, we have the example here of the local and cities actions. We've talked about this in our report. These infrastructures, we talk about this in urban analysis with Bogota, which was an example of this strategy. We also have a trend of the US cities which are wanting to ban gas from the new building. About 50 cities in California have already taken actions. As you can see on this map, they have already adopted these actions in order to ban gas in new buildings. Finally, the 10 key takeaways, which in regards to shareholder activism, civil society, and its scope of action, and climate lawsuits, either for states like the Netherlands or France. We've also seen cases in the UK where the Supreme Court finally allowed Heathrow Airport extension. And last year, we were talking about the opposite. What we're seeing this year is a shareholder activism. We see this in many of the board of management and main companies in order to find solutions for climate. We've seen this with shareholders voting resolutions to force companies for transparency. The Engine #1 also fund, which has seen 3 more shareholders joining the Exxon board of managers, and Chevron shareholders also have reinforced the climate objectives of the company. Quickly, we've also focused on the shareholders for palm oil. to see how this has been carried out in Malaysia and Indonesia in order to have a normative framework to frame the certified palm oil production. Now we will move on and we will give the floor to Bernard Soulage and to our other speakers who are here with us today. Thank you very much. Bernard Soulage, I'm the General Secretary of Climate Change. As Ronan was saying, it all started, and some of you were there in Lyon 6 years ago. Our scope is territorial, and we will be listening to a few speakers today. We will have a change between the second and the third speaker. After the ambassador, we have our speaker who will be taking the floor next. And then we'll go back to Mr. Vallier. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for being here with us today. We have two main questions for you, and I think you already know what these questions are. First is your overall appreciation of COP26. You were at the first forefront of this meeting. Secondly, the role of what we are here for. Several hundreds of people who are here represented today. How can we help in this sense? But first of all, your overall appreciation of COP26 in 5-6 minutes. What is your assessment of the COP for France and the UN? And we'll give you about 5 minutes. Thank you for being here with us, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you very much for your invitation. Indeed, congratulations for all the wonderful work that you have carried out for this amazing report now regarding COP26. I was there with Ronan in the final plenary session. Much was said about it in the media, and I will start with this regarding the phase down for coal phase down. And the commenters were moved by this, but you have to remember where we were coming from. Just 6 months ago, when we were desperately at the J20 meeting, desperately trying to get the mention for coal. And we were hearing some of our partners at the J20 or J7 that it was absolutely no use to even talk about coal because we will not have anything about coal in the final report. In July, which seems now an eternity, in July, we did not manage to obtain the mention of coal. Yet for the first time in the UNFCCC report, we have a mention of fossil energy, of coal energy, which is totally unexpected compared to what we were expecting at the beginning of the COP26. So from that point of view, this is positive. What's also positive, it's actually the whole mitigation aspect. There's been an awareness of the emergency situation. This was put forward very much so, especially the 1.5 goal, which has been our compass for the COP. This is an objective or a goal that is actually going even beyond what was decided upon in the Paris Agreement, with an urgent request for all of the parties to be reliable and to review their commitments. We've seen many commitments and medium term or midterm from the various NDCs, but also more long-term and very long-term until 2060 with India, for example. So the whole point there was to know how will the states really go about making the decisions to implement the decisions and to make sure that their commitments will be held. There's a whole range of series of actions, a requirement to all parties that would not have a pass complying to the agreement, Paris Agreement, to review their decision. There will be an annual ministerial roundtable to assess the action. There will be a report from the UNFCCC every year to assess the situation in terms of ambitions and mitigations. And for long-term strategy, there will be an inclusion of a strong language through which France contributed too much, and for long-term strategies and for the requirement to all parties to have long-term strategies and to explain how they will go about reaching low carbon or zero carbon neutralities, the Saudi Arabian 2060 and so on. All of these countries will have to explicitly explain how they will go about it. These are positive points. What we are seeing also is many sectorial commitments. Many countries have committed to this. The declaration of the end of export credits, this declaration, which France joined on the Friday, which was the day before the end of COP26, which was something quite remarkable. I'm thinking again looking back to where we were just a year ago. It was totally not possible to imagine the end of the coal export, for example. Yes, we had South Korea, then Japan, then in the end we had China, which decided to put an end to building coal plants. And at the end of this meeting, we came to a conclusion and we had a text to ratify this decision. So many things are moving forward and many things need to be really highlighted. Very quickly, yes, let's move on to the second question, please. Our second question, yes, regarding what Antonio Guda said, which was, we will see whether or not non-state actors will be serious or not by assessing what they are doing. How do you see this? Is this one of the main preoccupations? All of us should ask the same question. It's not just so much a commitment, but what we actually do. How can we work on this? Ronan was saying that the Egyptians indicated that wanted to relaunch the Marrakesh process. So what is the role of all these local authorities and how do we assess this? We have similar rules as states, as non-state actors. Of course, this is absolutely key. We've talked, of course, about the states' commitments and their responsibility of the states, but there's everything else, and non-state actors, of course. And we've heard with much interest the declaration of the UN General Secretary to say that there needs to be a responsibility of all the non-state actors. And I'm thinking especially about this huge alliance announced by Mike Carnell, the Glasgow Financial Alliance, with tremendous figures, $130,000 billion that would become the net zero by 2050. How will this happen? How will this be assessed and verified? So we do have ideas. We have ideas, for example, at the dam with the ACT methodology, which is assessing low carbon transition, which is a robust method going way beyond other methodologies like SBTI in order to fix commitment. But then there's a way of doing this and how you meet and keep these commitments. This is a robust methodology which mainly destined to companies, but we will also make sure that this will become universalized, and we will do what's necessary so that states as well as non-state actors can actually answer their commitments. Thank you very much. As you know, climate change is a partner, is part of our report. As Ronan was saying, it is a meta report, but we need to get not only commitments, but also realizations. So we will be a very serious partners. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Since you were talking about companies, we will now turn to the Vice President of a company, also Vice President of Climate Change. Bonjour, Gilles. We
We saw each other last Thursday with who's got quite a concise question. We've seen it in the media. We see that there's been supply chain problems worldwide. It had an impact on transportation systems. Of course, it had an impact on many things. Even it may have decreased worldwide growth. It had an impact on raw materials, so that we could find the right materials for the right product. So Schneider being one of the actors in decarbonization, how can you see this from an economic point of view? And how do you see it within the confines of the supply chain from a large company's point of view? Thank you, Bernard, and thank you all to the climate chance team. I'm going to thank and congratulate Mr. Crouzat. And it's also easy to say that the negotiations at COP were not great, but we can also say that the French stakeholders were there working hard. It's not always an easy job. And I think I should congratulate him and his team, and also Climate Chance's team, because I think it's an absolutely superb organization, and the report is great. It's easy to read, and we can share it in the value chain. And I think it's very important. Thank you very much. There are a lot of documents, of course, and if you may not be a researcher, maybe you want to go over things quicker. So if I could respond to what you've said, the 3 points. So can I say a few things about COPE, and then we'll come back to supply chain. I'm quite disappointed about the COPE conference, and I think it has it will have an impact on many people, including non-state actors. So non-Occidental, non-Western companies, including China, have published relaunch, rebound plans. And each time they say they're going to move forward with energy transition. And however, over the past 18 months, you cannot find this in any pledge over and above the COPE negotiations. So we could have thought that, considering the fact that we're in a very different situation, the COVID pandemic crisis, we would have thought that the states, the various countries who are looking at this rebound in these under these circumstances, if we would have thought that these states would have been redefining their promises and pledges. However, we see that this is not the case. So, as the ambassador said, progress has been made, but as an observer, we see that there's a large gap between the actual pledge, which has been stated, and the actual pledges that are undertaken. So concerning evolution and adaptation, and to see how what is happening in developing countries. Let's leave China to the side for the moment. We have to see that the industrialized countries may be able to move forward with their goals, but they do not share this and try to bring with them the developing countries. And we see that the poorer countries are sort of left with much of the lot to do. So it's something that's disappointing. And so with all of the different paradigm of COVID, I ask myself why. So I'm disappointed. Second thing, and I think this will be a type of response to the question asked, as a non-state stakeholder representing a company, I see that there's a gap between all of the various agreements and the things that have actually been undertaken concerning point 1. Why is that? Because I've observed it. I've been able to participate in many meetings about this. We saw the agreements have led to companies stating their net zero goals more, earlier or later. We see that these, how are these pledges really taken into account in their value chain? Never before have so many companies actually done that. Look at Schneider, which is an electricity company, which tried to reduce emissions with all of its suppliers. So it's being included in all of this supply chain, and I think this has a big impact. So in all this value chain, I think Mr. Bernard spoke about it, is the third part. I see that at this COP, maybe more than in the previous COPs, there was a lot of talk about technology, so up-to-date technologies, which we hope to change right away, and also future technology, which will allow us to actually achieve the pledges. And so this initial disappointment becomes something positive, because we can see that we are able to put something on the market. And if we are able to make the various actors move, we see that it can be doable in the future. We can see that the challenges of the supply chain are key. This is the case for many companies. And also it has forced us to change how we do things. So we have already put in some twerks, and we're going to do this in the future. This will be done within the 130 largest countries, which represent a lot of the part of the market in many companies. We hope that we can localize production, meaning produce where it's being sold, and a multi-up topic, which is sometimes made fun of. There's a management in Hong Kong for Asia, in Boston for the United States, in France, in Paris for Europe. And we're hoping that this will be a real IT solution management. And I hope this will lead to an increased local nature of the companies. And we hope that we can have at least 90% of the management coming from the company where we are actually working. So I think this will allow us to move forward after this COVID crisis. So concerning the raw materials crisis, we have to work on the circular economy, which is the reusing consumed products, and we have to keep this in mind with the growth. And we hope that this will lead to a decrease in the use of raw materials. This creates jobs, new jobs. And this also includes jobs that have been kind of made redundant over the past 40 years. And secondly, this will allow us to achieve growth in another domain. So the environmental water waste management companies, they're working on this. We're not working on it enough up until now, but it will be one of the main challenges in the upcoming years. But for Schneider, I hope we can be an example, a leader in this domain. It's the 3-point response is easy. The future innovation, 5% of our turnover, a lot of partnerships with many companies. So I think, so to wrap things up, we have to transform from dialogue to partnerships, alliances. And this was very important in the innovation sector, and also relocalization. It has to be done in an intelligent manner, and I hope all companies will to me. Schneider will be working on this with our IT tools, which will allow us to be more efficient when we do relocalize. Thirdly, we have to keep in mind in all job types, the effects of the circular economy and its impact on the after COVID world, which could be quite positive, both short and mid long term. the circular economy also allows us to decrease our carbon footprint. So we can see that the two topics are linked up. Thank you very much, and for maybe some remarks, we could come back to it. This is the remark coming from a professor of economy that I am, concerning circular economy. I think we have to look at it really holistically by all of it. I've looked at it from concerning batteries. Everybody knows that batteries should be recycled, but there's also the question of price between new and recycled ones. You know that all this has a top-down impact. For example, the mine workers in RDC, it has an impact, and I think it's really important, and this has a large impact on many sectors and many domains. So I think there's going to be a question that's going to be asked. So thank you very much. You've already made allusion to many points that will be in the 2022 report. You spoke about your disappointment, but also the fact that your perspectives and the optimism that should be with us. So, Mr. Ambassador, so what we can't understand sometimes is the potential of the reduction of the GHGs, which should be in some of the negotiations.
Parce que nous y passons beaucoup d'énergie, nous aussi, en Afrique, avec d'autres.
So we are working on all of these topics, and including non-state and state actors, especially from Africa, in these questions. How can you explain, finally, the impacts and actually the undertakings and the impact on the various levels, and which may lead to the fact that it's a little bit of a pessimistic outcome, especially when we look at the 1.5 goal and if this will be achieved. Of course, on a national level, we have to keep in mind all of these of the undertakings, not only of the regional authorities, but also of the non-state actors. They have a very wide or limited scope. So normally it should really have an impact on all of the economy. All of the economy. So if it's done in a correct way, it should keep in mind all of the GHG decreases in the economy, be them companies or non-state actors or the others. So this is not actually what we've seen. So for Gilles, following the end of the COP, the ambassador spoke about all of the breakthroughs that were done in the final version of the agreement, especially concerning Article 6 and the various mechanisms. Are there mechanisms for reinforcing action? And does a company like Schneider really analyze these mechanisms? So how they can include them and how they can be more impactful? No, I don't think we're intelligent enough to do that. That was a joke, ha ha ha. But it's difficult to see what the words of an actual agreement, what their impact is in the next 3 to 5 years. So the challenge is very well known, is to put on the market solutions and services which clients can use to decrease their carbon footprint. So for example, EVs are more and more efficient, and they are pushing people to be greener and greener. And that we can see that IT solutions will be fundamental in the future. When you look at IT solutions, we can think about TikTok, which may not be an actual green solution, but there are IT solutions that are very important. For example, transitioning towards electricity rather than coal-fired electricity. But we have to be able to respond to demand, and this is part of our role as a company. We can see that which company will be the most sustainable over the next year or 2 years. But we have to keep in mind that there's also the shareholder and investment points of views. On one hand, there are companies that say we are going to achieve net zero. They focus on technologies which are more and more popular. And the investors have to be more and more green. And it's the same as in curling. We see that if all of these non-state actors, they see that they're able to move forward, but they have to keep in mind, how can this link up with the state negotiations that are being undertaken, and how can they link these two things up? So maybe it's not that bad that there is this gap between the state, non-state sides, civil society and companies. This academia has to try to make things be more efficient. And I think adaptation will probably, at least this is what I hope, this will force us to go farther and farther and be greener and greener. And I think Bernard is right that human rights are part of climate. And I think on that side, nobody is putting enough pressure. So let's go to another non-state stakeholder, Frédéric Vallier, who is the Secretary-General of the Regional Authorities Council in Europe. He's also a member of Climate Chance. And we'll see how the regional authorities are looking at this and how they look at it from a European point of view. And we can see that it's a battle that constantly has to be waged. We always think that that they're always working and somehow improvising. And that people are working very hard. And we think that it's important to go past the first stage. So my question is a little bit more precise. We can see that there are difficulties in Europe or maybe elsewhere that between the various regions, cities, and the states. How is it possible, in concrete terms, to be sure that things get better? And then in all of the this exchange that we've had following the Convent of Mayors, do not include social and justice questions in the energy transition mix. I think it's very important, especially for the regional authorities, because they're very close to the citizens, but it's not always easy to include. So how can we, in concrete terms, go over and above this conflict between the regional authorities and the state, and also how can we make transition fairer?
Many questions. Thank you, Bernard. Thank you. Hello, everybody. It is quite complex indeed. First of all, like Gilles, I want to congratulate you for the wonderful work that you did in writing this report, which is very important to us, for us local authorities. Also to be able to compare each other and see how we are evolving overall in our various sectors. So congratulations again to you. So how do we perceive the COP? We're always a little bit disappointed, as Bernard was saying, we always want more. And it's been a long time now that we've been fighting for real recognition of the role of local governments, local authorities, and I insist on local governments. We are not exactly non-state actors, we're actually part of the state actors, and we are committed within each of our states in the governance of a society, which is a very important point for us. If we do not create the conditions for all of the state actors, whether they'd be local, regional, or national, to actually commit in a comprehensive partnership, then we will not resolve the climate crisis, which is the message that we've been carrying for some years now, even with Ronan in the various COPs. There is no opposition. There should not be actually an opposition between the state and local territories and local authorities, but it should be a complementarity. But very often, mayors and cities are like front runners of climate action, and states should rely on them. In Europe, we are now involved with the EU in various programs. I'm sure Eero will talk about this later on, but globally speaking, and that's also a bit true in Europe, unfortunately, what we are seeing for the last few years now, we are observing a going back to centralization, to state centralization, which doesn't actually make the commitment of local authorities easy. They are less and less considered or as supplying or as completing state action. Same for France. When you implement public policies, procedures, you ask local authorities to follow, but we don't always take into account their own desires or their own proposals. And in Europe, most specifically, this is something that we've been asking, that to make sure that we will actually take into account the reality of what's happening on the field. This is not simply a decision from Brussels that could apply to all territories in the same way. In the ongoing programs, the Just Transition Fund, the Green Deal, what we want is that the reality of what's happening on the ground would be taken into account. You cannot compare the situation of a city like Copenhagen to another city like Bucharest, for example, for many reasons. So we need to have this capacity to adapt, which doesn't mean that the ambition should not be the same. Actually, the ambition should actually be stronger in Bucharest because they are much more behind than in Copenhagen. But we need to support these measures, both by taking into account the discrepancies and by a stronger commitment in terms of financial support and in terms of inventing new initiatives to support these countries or cities. As I was saying, or as Gilles was saying earlier on, we need to rely on the situation that we are in today, on the recovery plan. And if we do not rely on the recovery to accelerate and speed up transition, we will really miss an opportunity, which is a bit strange to talk about an opportunity when we are facing a pandemic, but this should give us the opportunity to rethink about our own modes, ways of working and development modes. If we look more into details at national recovery plans, in my opinion, this is a bit too much going back to centralization and to other ways. So we need to pay attention to that. Secondly, I think someone was saying this earlier on, we need to move from a commitment to action taking. Bernard was saying we've been following the COPs for some years now. We always want to make a lot of announcements. Of course, these announcements, these commitments are important, but these commitments, these announcements need to be followed by practical, concrete actions and action plans. And that's an important topic. So there was some form of satisfaction during the COP, however, which was to have in the introduction of the COP, taken into account of a research action at several levels, which is something we want to rely on in order to prepare what's coming next after Glasgow. We'll be preparing the next COP, and we will see how this commitment towards a greater collaboration at multi-levels can actually become reality. And we rely and we count on the EU and the European governments, and in particular on France, to make sure that this will be efficient. Now, regarding climate action and citizenship, climate justice and social justice, this is rather complicated because mayors are at the forefront facing the citizens when it comes to also taking on board the difficulties which citizens have in committing to transition actions. We've seen this recently when there is a building project for building wind power. Often you would have a committee of people mobilizing against wind energy. This is a topic, but we could use other examples. If you want to build a recycling center, etc. So that makes a discussion, the debate, more complex for the electing members at the local level. First of all, we need to be able to explain and educate people regarding these initiatives, and also get support from the states and from the citizen community to realize that transition also involves changes in lifestyle, in relationship towards the territory and the environment. And all of us must take our responsibilities. Once these changes are put in place, I believe that citizens finally accept the challenges and the changes more easily. I'm thinking, for example, about the development of pedestrian streets in cities like Paris. We saw the reactions, but we've seen this also in Brussels. In Brussels, I think is the largest pedestrian city center in the world. The mayor, for other reasons, actually resigned eventually. But today, most of the people living in Brussels are very happy about these pedestrian streets. Same goes with cycle lanes, etc. There is always a time of difficulties, but once we explain these changes, we need to explain this socially. If we want to make a connection with what I was saying earlier on, with supporting the local and regional governments, energy transition go through the transition of social housing and public buildings, but that requires also financial support. Regions, local authorities will not have the necessary means with the help of the World Bank or European Bank in order to help this transition, to make sure that people living in social housings will be supported, that it would not be any cost to them. That's what I could say. Do I need to stop? Yes, we're trying to keep to our timing. I was going to go back to what you were saying earlier on, maybe asking the same question to also Mr. Ambassador regarding the French presidency at the EU. In a few words, what is the agenda? I don't know if it's possible to talk about this today. Maybe that needs to be finalized. Is it something that will be on the agenda of the French presidency? Indeed, I'm not in a position to reveal the agenda of the French presidency regarding climate, but of course we will be working hard on this 45. That will be the main part of the French presidency, to develop all the laws that have been proposed by the Commission last July in order to strengthen the low carbon European market, the new goals for sharing this effort, and the new mechanism for adjusting the carbon measures. is also raising some concerns with some of our partners, but we are determined to move forward in this. Thank you. I think Ronan would have said it just like I do. We left the COP26 or COP21 rather with a disappointment that France did not insist on the role of non-state actors as much as it should. We worked hard with my colleague at the time, Laurence Zubiana and others. Maybe this is again the opportunity for France to show that it is determined to help, and we've said this earlier, to show a willingness to see not only commitments but also actions. It's a request, if you like. If France could really be at the upfront of these decisions, not only just for commitments, for the NDCs, for financing, etc., that would be a really good thing. Thank you very much. May I just say one word, Bernard? I think it's important to mention this. Besides Europe, of course, and also in Europe, of course, but what we need to take into consideration is that the ecology transition should lead us to a world that would be better for all. I'm thinking about the most vulnerable populations like the women, the children, the youth. That needs to be taken into account also for us at a local level, is actually to grant a better comfort to all the populations and to guarantee an equal access to energy and to all kinds of services like access to water, sanitation, etc. Okay, thanks for that last sentence. That makes a good transition for our next speaker. I think if we are very much in line with what you said, I will now give the floor to Anne Barre, who is also a very active member. She's in Germany, but we are all working at the European level. She's very active, and she carries this same message which she just shared regarding the most vulnerable populations, such as the women. And sometimes we feel there is a discrepancy, and I can share a personal testimony, which did not surprise me in a sense, but with the yellow vest movement in France. I was in a department in France where we had a lot of yellow vest people. Most of them were women. They were directly facing this issue of what's going to happen tomorrow morning with the rise of the energy price. Am I going to be able to go and work? If I'm a nurse, I'm doing odd jobs and so on and so forth. There was a real concern. It was a very striking discrepancy that was very significant. People were saying, I don't have anything against this energy transition, but give me the means to make this transition, to face these new conditions. And that was very significant. So Anne, you can give us a more global or overview. How do we avoid this transition to be at the expense to these populations? And thank you. Yes, thank you, Bernard, for giving me the floor. I'm delighted to be here with you today and take part in this roundtable as a member of Climate Change, but also as a representative of the WECF, the Coordinated Gender and Climate Policy, representing women and minorities, gender minorities, and coordinator for gender and climate at the WECF. Indeed, regarding the conclusions of this COP, to some extent, this is a great disappointment. Even though the states said they measured the extent of the climate emergency, the real commitments are not yet up to our needs or our expectations, especially regarding the momentum of actions. We see a big gap discrepancy. What we're asking, it's not so much the net zero, but the real zero, real solutions on the ground, addressing citizens, which is why it is key that climate action would be supportive of the most impacted countries, of the most impacted populations, including groups, the most vulnerable groups, not so much because of their physical characteristics, but because of their rights and because of, unfortunately, inequalities to rights. And I was glad to hear that climate action and climate policies is also about human rights. During this COP, for us, we believe that there was a lack of opportunity to hear about real commitments and efficient mechanisms regarding adaptation. Regarding adaptation, there were many announcements made, but it's not a doubling of the financing, rather a multiplication per 5 and immediate. Therefore, we have moved forward quicker in this area, and women are really actresses of adaptation and mitigation. They are key players. They are the one staying on the territories, staying in the ecosystems which have been greatly damaged. They are in charge of their own families. Often the men have to go, move away, and yet the women do not have the means, whether it be political means or access to financing, in order to implement the solutions that they have imagined or they are trying to implement. Now, for adaptation, I believe we need to put together on the same level words and commitments and ambitions and actions, and to be more compliant to the realities on the ground. Regarding losses and damages, we were expecting more facilities. There again, we were disappointed that this opportunity was not really fully taken. At the end of the day, when it comes to the just transition that we talk about, what we need is to see mechanism being implemented that will be efficient. And we need to really encompass the whole reality of what's happening on the ground. And this has been exacerbated by the climate change. I would give you one example. Many sectors, for example, where these inequalities are present but are not known. For example, in the transport sector, many times there is an unequal access to transport, and this is detrimental to women for accessing work. It's a calculation that was made by the World Bank, and this is an important figure. It's an important aspect to take into account. This should really condition our political measures in order to have a just transition and just access to transport. Thank you for your question, Bernard. Regarding energy, we are glad to see that energy transition and investments for renewable energies are ongoing and are speeding up, yet these are sectors in which women at a global level are only representing only 25% of employees. For example, for wind power, only 8% of women are represented. There are still a lack of opportunities and lack of access for women in these various sectors. Yet it's a shame, because it's a pity, because there are great opportunities in the energy transition in most of the developing countries regarding the support to women entrepreneurship, women, especially when it comes to food safety, and food production. Yet what we have seen is that at the national level, as well as at a local level, very few programs have been implemented in order to support politically and financially these sectors, such as the food sectors, especially supporting women entrepreneurship. Mostly we have micro women entrepreneurs who are in charge of the food safety. Sorry to interrupt. We know each other quite well. We work together. We were in Africa together. It's a half empty or half full glass. It's a question. Sometimes I feel that things are going in the right directions. When I hear you or hear your colleagues, in a way, what is your appreciation really? Do you think things have changed or not really? Or are we still far from what is being possible?
Concerning gender equality in climate change or climate fairness, on the ground, I think we're very far from the goalpost. If we look at the OECD public investment in climate change, the projects which are financed climate projects with the main goal of equality, gender equality, it's about 1%, so it's really low. Let's look at it in a more holistic public financing, which includes private financing. We're at 0.01%. So there's still a lot of work that has to be done. And getting back to the human rights, that's important. And it's also the lack of political will. A lot of opportunities have been looked over because we haven't really measured inequality enough, what the impacts are on the actual populations. And there are so many missed opportunities, missed investment opportunities. I don't think these are only extra costs, but I think maybe allocating financing in a better way. So I think we have to keep this in mind nowadays. And climate action can only be successful if everyone is at the table. All of the minorities, men and women, everyone has to be at the negotiating table. And I think that the COP26 is still not really understood this question in its entirety, despite the fact that there are things that are moving forward successfully. And we have been trying to really put this into the focus since 2021 and for the past 5 years. So we're trying to really put these into the focal point to give them a value and also to accompany these undertakings, to allow these women and men and the organization which have both men and women, but who usually focus or target women and gender equality. We want to make them aware of how they can understand the mechanisms of the climate agreement and how they can better formulate their requests and how they can access financing better. So coming from the funding agencies and the politicians, there's something that has to be undertaken to understand how we can realign this financing to really, really be up at the level of the non-state actors. So it's a great transition. We're going to speak with Mr. Eero Alio. Welcome. Because you are overlooking these inclusion and civil society questions. So you're going to try to relaunch the European Climate Pact, which looks at these questions. And so the question is quite simple. You've understood a lot of requests. you see that there is the will coming from the regional authorities, the companies, civil society to be heard, understood. And I think that Europe, the European Union is trying to give proper answers. So what is your way of looking at, how do you look at this? And are there positive points that have to be looked at? And what also has to be done? Thank you, Mr. Soulage, and to all of the co-speakers. So good afternoon here from Brussels. So you asked a few questions concerning the long list of activities that we have, and I think they are more bottom-up. This was promoted also by the European Commission. So it's part of our logic to work top-down with the legislation and to foster bottom-up undertakings by including civil society and the various stakeholders and actors. This is the logic behind us trying to really put together this covenant of mayors, and it was really interesting to see that this was mentioned in your report, especially your comment concerning this initiative, which was the forerunner of the bottom-up approach that we have taken. And I also see in your report that the roles of the municipalities and cities is still really important for this transition. We can also see that the Covenant of Mayors and its Pact has achieved the 2020 targets. And this has given some impulse to undertake and achieve other actions. For example, last week, to have 100 carbon neutral and smart cities. It was the last undertaking, similar undertaking. Also, we had the European Climate Pact, the ECP. So here we speak about citizens. And we talk about a lot of grassroots stakeholders. So the logic that the current Commission is using is to give these groups and communities, the citizens, a type of cooperation framework in which they can be involved in the energy change or energy transition. So in concrete terms, we try to give them very practical tools, some examples how to organize a conference concerning climate questions, how to really put metrics to what we're trying to do and our various undertakings. And so we're trying to give these groups these tools so that everyone can be part of this transition. So it's very logical, of course, and that shows why we're doing it. It's not because we have a very Pollyanna way of looking at things. Of course we do, but at the same time, it's also crucial because the challenges are in front of us. We cannot only work top down from the government to the citizens, especially concerning carbon neutrality. It's impossible to work only top down. Everybody has to contribute. So let's look at the cities firstly. So I think we have a 3/4, 75% rule. 3/4 of CO2 emissions are produced by cities, and about 3/4 of the legislation has been implemented in the cities. And maybe 3/4, so a little bit more, 3 of that is of the European economy is actually produced in cities. So keeping in mind all of that, we have to keep in mind we have to include cities in these goals and also in the policy shaping. So why can we not work on these goals and really use their contributions? So these results help us to include citizens and help us have these citizens working actively on the transition. So also that we have to keep in mind that they should be working on this just transition, the fair transition. And these initiatives also give us a type of direct communication, brainstorming, and awareness channels. We need the citizens, these groups to put all this together. And we have done this. So in the Pact de Maire, the Covenant of Mayors, the EU Commissioner has gone to meet up with the various mayors in the Board of Administration. And we talk about very concrete ideas concerning air quality, challenges facing transportation. So these are informal brainstorming sessions which allow us to make better rules and legislation. So we also get feedback. And we also find during these discussions concrete examples to speed up the work undertaken by the European Council and Parliament, and especially if we look at the 50-55 that was spoken about by the ambassadors. So these are concrete examples which can show us that such and such an undertaking is possible. So it's not just some utopic way of thinking, and that we can actually see that it's actually being undertaken in a specific city so that we can scale the action up to the European level. It also allows us to do some test stages at the local level by using these contact initiatives. For example, the renovation wave. This concerns renovating the real estate of the various cities. And the Covenant, the Pact is really involved in this. Idem for the precarity of transition, new greener topics. We're really working on concrete things, and we're able to not only test these undertakings, but also scale them up and move them forward quicker. So I see that with this Covenant of Mayors and also with the European Climate Pact, that these are initiatives which may give way to more permanent structures, which however may be independent from the European Commission's mandate. As you know, it's a 5-year European Commission, but the energy transition has to go on for much longer than 5 years. So there has to be a planning stability and also an increasing credibility and accessibility for civil society. So these initiatives have to keep on moving forward, notwithstanding changes within the Commission or its priorities. So it adds value to what we're doing. Thank you very much. So concerning your last question, we've spoken about this Covenant of Mayors, which is a permanent structure, and it's going on for more than 5 years. I think it may be 7 years. It depends upon the planning that has been put forth. Of course, it's a little bit complicated. We have some gap period when the European Commission changes, and we know that the budget changes. So it's not really, we're not really in power of this. So concerning what you've spoken about, could you give us some specific examples as to what we can do as regional authorities and how they can be included, and how we can include civil society in a more permanent way? Do you have any ideas as to how that may look like? So the European Climate Pact, of course, this is direct support under the auspices of Madame van der Leyen, the President of the Commission. She is really behind this initiative, and she really rolled it out. And I think that this will become permanent. Now, concerning a youth initiative, what we hope to do is to connect and integrate, for example, this covenant of marriage, to create partnerships and cooperation with them and, for example, the local climate pacts. There are areas in France that are already doing this. So these are local citizen activities which move forward better if they do receive the support from the cities in which they are acting. So at the Commission level, we are trying to integrate these initiatives into the European Climate Pact. And I think this is one of the most important initiatives. Which are even under the city level, so meaning that they're even in the neighborhood area, the very, very ultra local level. Yes, that's true. I live in Grenoble, is the capital of the European Pact this year. And when you talk about a local pact, it's already been put together and it exists already. But what's really important is that they're not only elected officials there. The civil society reps have to be there. I was an elected official in this city. Of course, we can try to put together initiatives, but it's actually the companies, the citizens, the various neighborhoods which are actually moving forward. And this is really important at the local level. I'm not sure if the ambassador is still with us, but I think it would be a good way to link up what I just spoke about, the French presidency of the European Union. So I think that during our 6-month presidency, if we could try to really include and cement this presence in the European Climate Pact, meaning we can include everyone in it. So I'd like to rebound to what you've said, something that I've forgotten. I even jotted it down, which is the Grenoble example. There's another example in Belgium, in Louvain. At the city level, things work best when there's a network that involves everyone. Cities, NGOs, companies, everyone is involved. And when this is done in an independent manner, so when it's done not really with the overview of the various mayors of the city, and in Louvain it worked very well. In Grenoble it's the same thing, and I think in Nantes and Helsinki it also worked very well. So there are different models, but I think it has to be done in a holistic approach. So this is a governance question. Thank you very much. I think we can wrap up this roundtable. Michel Sabon. She underwent chemotherapy this afternoon, so she must be very tired, because we will encourage her. Everybody who knows Michelle know that she's a force in her own right, and we hope that she gets better really quickly. And if Michelle is there, we all send you a big hug, and I hope that you will be here quickly with us. So now I would like to give the floor before giving the floor to Mr. Ronan for the conclusion. I'd like to flag a supplement in the Echo magazine. So this week we're going to publish with an alternative economy magazine in the December edition. We're going to talk about climate action since COVID to the COP26. When we look at, and we're going to analyze questions as we've spoken about today, how we can really react to the COP26 results. Get the magazine, have a look at the report, which was uploaded this morning, if you want to have a look at that. So to wrap things up, please follow us all this week in our webinars, when we're looking at very targeted questions in the various web workshops. Wednesday, 11 to 12:30, tools for accelerating the decarbonization, especially concerning final users. We'll have a panel of experts, and they will be with us for that. 3 to 4:30, 1st of December. Are the large companies able to face the challenges of climate transition? And then Tuesday, of carbon capturing and hydrogen, are breakthrough technologies, are they able to face the challenges? Also to see what the various companies are doing. And then Thursday also, 3 to 4:30, we're going to look at all of the on-the-ground actors, not only in Europe, but also in Africa. And then we'll have the virtual week of climate with one of our very faithful partners. We will organize with Samuel a workshop to look at what's taken place following this report. Please come. All of you are invited. Please come. It's a collective undertaking. We will have various third-party experts will be there, and environment actors. You can send in your questions, your remarks, and we're going to try to do a wrap-up at the Friday session of everything that we've looked at during this week. So we're going to wrap this up by the president. So I'll give the floor to Mr. Ronan here. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your participation. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador Stéphane Crouzat. What I would like to say, we felt, Mr. Ambassador, in the first presentation, the fear to be too negative, to have too negative a conclusion of the COP. We want to fight against this fatalism, to think that maybe we can't do it. But I think this roundtable this afternoon gave us opportunity to hear voices, even though the impression was not very positive. Yet we are seeing actions, but we've put on the table some real perspectives, and we will make sure that we will reinforce and strengthen these dialogues, and especially during the French presidency that's coming soon, and in order to reach the minus 55% goal of gas emission in Europe is an extremely ambitious goal. That's a challenge for Europe. And this cannot be achieved without the mobilization of companies and all the civil society stakeholders. We have a roadmap, which in the next 6 months will be to help us move forward in this collective effort. That's an important message that we take out from this afternoon's session. Another point, another takeaway, and Anne said it mainly, and also Frédéric, if we do not include all the aspects of development, justice, and so on at the global level, and then it would be not possible. And it's not only the responsibility of France. So France is actually, to be honest, taking it much further than other countries in their own commitments. So without this issue of social justice, development, solidarity, we will not be able to reach our goals, including if we take into account also the pandemic. The pandemic was not very much mentioned during the COP debate. I was surprised. Actually, the Africans actually were talking more about this and made a connection between the efforts required of them for climate action and access to vaccines. So we want to fight against climate change and strengthens also the tools for development. That remains a priority on our agenda. So thank you very much to all. Thank you to Antoine, Gillod, Samuel Laval, who will be in the Guinness Book for their work, for the amount of work which they did. 1,000 reports they had to absorb to write the synthesis of this annual report. We want to thank them for all their hard work and all the team of climate change. If we were in a real meeting, physical meeting, we would applaud. Antoine mentioned to you the various points for this week. We are here also to intervene in all the places, in also speaking tomorrow morning in Paris at the town hall. So we're here to help you. This is a quality report. This has been said by others and us and ourselves. The goal of this report is to be as widely spread as possible. And Alter Eco, the special edition, will be available in the next 2-3 days. So thank you to all our speakers today. I think we have a roadmap for the coming months now, as we expect, as we wait for the next summit in Africa, which will take place next September, October in Dakar, Senegal, if the condition and the allows. Thank you. Thank you again for Bernard for being the facilitator, and we will meet you again throughout this week for our various programs. Thank you very much and goodbye to all. Thank you. Bye-bye.